Well, good evening again, everybody. And it's only 24 hours since we were last here, but many of you are aware that in the last 36 hours, really, David Vance has been subject to a huge amount of criticism on Twitter. He's been reported, his account was suspended temporarily, largely on account of the volume of I'm just turning up my sound. Largely on the volume of trolls who attacked his account. The big hitters: Owen Jones, David Lammy, Gary Lineker, Marcus Rashford, have all come out and criticised him and called him an awful racist. And some of the people have really been quite upset that he's got a blue tick on Twitter. So given that David's got this big following, and this is all about race and racism, I suggested to David today that I could actually inquire about his racism and subject him, I hope, to a fairly rigorous inquisition on what he was doing when he made that allegedly offensive tweet against Marcus Rashford. So David has very kindly allowed me to lead this show. So welcome, everybody. Nice to see you all back. Thanks for the comments on the sound. And so with no further ado, I'm just going to welcome David onto his own stream.
And with one leap, here he appeared. So from my prison cell, a warm welcome to everybody. Thank you all for joining us in your numbers, I can see. Rebecca, it's interesting to be back so quickly, but so much has happened in 24 hours. What a difference a day makes, as the song goes. So so to summarize this, folks, I'm very happy for Rebecca to ask me whatever questions she wants on any regard, on anything that I've said. And, I, needless to say, stand over every word that I said. I want to explain exactly to all you reasonable people background, because I know in an echo chamber like Twitter, context doesn't seem to matter, but in the real world that we all live in, context is really important. So there's lots of stuff to go through, Rebecca. As I say, I make myself open to you and any questions that you want to ask. I just see one of the moderators, Rebecca, Chris, is just saying, should he moderate on vile comments?
No moderation at all, please. But thank you for the offer, Chris. Absolutely no moderation tonight, because I think it's really important that I get led by the people who are upset by David. And actually, I do want people to see their comments. As David has said, one of the problems with Twitter is that we all do operate in echo chambers, and it's only very occasionally that the algorithms or the hashtags push you over into other echo chambers. And I'm sure all of the people who are sort of criticizing David tonight themselves would have come under criticism for their own views on Twitter. So really what I want to do is to open the debate out tonight. And I really, really want people, if all you can do is say racist, bigot, scum, fine. But if you really do have something genuine to say, we'd love to hear your point. And I am going to be putting the left side of the debate to David tonight, and I'm going to suggest to him that it was unnecessary to cause the offence that he did. So I'm going to try my best to do that. If you can help me do that, all the better. So no moderation. Let's see your comments. Let's see your arguments. Right, David. So let's just go back. We've had a summer of discontent, to say the very least, and the global pandemic has almost been a boiling pot of frustration, quite a lot of mental health, quite a lot of boredom, I think, a lot of people losing their way, a lot of fear in people's lives. And so would you agree with me that issues like racism are going to be the ones that boil up first because they're so emotive in people's minds?
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. But I would also then add, Rebecca, that I think the word racism, just like the word racist, has been unfortunately bent and warped out of all shape, to the extent, as I've had ably demonstrated in the past 48 hours, where simply for expressing opinions, one is instantly, defamed as a racist. So, yes, racism is something we should all care about. I care about it, have done actually a long time. But by the same token, I'm not going to have people use the term to beat me over the head and shut me up when I believe I'm trying to talk about things that are actually that are not even remotely racist in the first instance. So, I accept the point about the summer of racism, Black Lives Matter and all of that. But in a way, what I've tried to talk about is nothing to do with that, but it's been dragged into that, like so many other people.
But just going back to the Black Lives Matter, so the protest and then the push back against it by people on the right side of the right political side, not the correct side, but the right-hand side of the argument. One of the instantaneous responses, well, all lives matter. And is it not fair to say that when taken historically, no matter what is said about who was put into racism by the other, when you look at the world as a whole, or even, let's say, America and Europe, white people do tend, as a group, as an ethnic group, they do tend to be more successful on the whole. So whatever racism and slavery we suffered, we've managed to recover it far better than Black people.
Yeah, that's an absolutely reasonable view of history. That's just that's observable history, Rebecca. But we're not to blame for that. That's speaking of the stream of history, and we're sitting in 2020 in that stream of history, and we live in an imperfect world. And yes, there is racism, and you and I have talked about this actually. In every society, it's race. There's many very racist African societies that we don't talk about so much, but racism, wherever it is something that all civilized people, in my view, should resolutely oppose and seek to deal with the root causes of it. You've just mentioned, for example, the relative lack of success in particularly Black communities. And that can be traced back into many areas, education being an important one, and also into family, the family unit, which in a sense is where I'm coming from, sort of on my tweet. So there are reasons for all of these things. And again, I simply want to explore the reasons and try and help, contrary to what my legions of haters have been suggesting.
So how is it helping to put out a tweet to criticize a 22-year-old footballer who himself was the victim of being in a single family? How does that actually help the cause by challenging him on what he did over the free school dinners? Well,
of course, we would have to accept that everybody, you, me, everybody watching this, none of us is so perfect that we can't be challenged. And, multi-millionaire Manchester United footballers don't have a monopoly over wisdom. So what I would like to do to try and address your point specifically, Rebecca, I would like to, if I can do the technology here, I'd like to share, I'd like to bring a couple of things up on the screen, because I think this will explain, Rebecca, why my tweet came about. And hopefully people just stick with me while I go through this one quickly. Basically, this whole thing came about on the 5th of September. And you can see back then that the Conservative MP, Kevin Hollinrake, tweeted about the success of Rishi's Eat Out to Get to Help Out scheme, how it boosts the economy, blah, blah, blah. Somebody replied to him saying that, undoubtedly a success, Kevin, credit where it's due, but while we're discussing food, why does it take footballer Marcus Rashford to make a stand for the hungry children in our society? To which he replied, this is Kevin Hollinrake, where they can. It's a parent's job to feed the children. So look, that is the starting point of where this all kicked off from. So this is about hunger and poverty in children. That was certainly the approach I was taking on it. So
can I just stop you there?
Yeah.
Just to drill down into that.
Yeah.
It may well be the parent's fault that a child is hungry at school, and hunger at school is a problem that teachers have to confront.
Indeed. Yeah.
But it doesn't help to feed a child to criticize the parent, because the parent is useless or poor at not getting the child fed going to school. And surely the aim should simply be to get the child fed. Whether it doesn't matter who's to blame for it, the child needs to be fed.
Well, I think that's a point, but I think you have to dive deeper into that point. The child should be fed, but there is such a thing as responsibilities, and we have to look at the balance of responsibilities. So
a child can't be responsible for the parent's choices. So a child cannot be their own advocate in getting their own breakfast, can they?
No, they can't. But every child in this world came in because two people, a mum and a dad, came together. And of course, as we go through this, Rebecca, my fundamental point is it's about parental responsibility. And yes, you've got crap parents. We understand that. I mean, and in a way, though, this is not being recognized by the Marcus Rashford fan club. So I want to go on to my second, because this is where Marcus comes into it. He responded to Kevin Hollenrake by saying, "I would urge you to talk to families before tweeting. To this day, I haven't met one parent who hasn't wanted or felt the responsibility to feed their kids." And he didn't stop there. He subsequently tweeted. The next tweet came to successive tweets, either he or his or whoever runs his Twitter account. He said, "Put to the side this comment from an MP. It's comments like this that prevent people from speaking truth and asking for help. We need to stop uplifting each other. I would have the same response to anyone tweeting this." A little bit of defensiveness there. But for me, the real problem I have is that he's actually trying to shut down discussion by saying simultaneously that this conservative, by asking a question, you are, well, back to this point, what did he say? It's comments like this that prevent people from speaking the truth. But hey, listen.
He says their truth, actually. Yeah. I don't know if that's a typo, but that's preventing people giving their individual versions of why perhaps their child does go hungry. I mean, you know, Twitter and Facebook, how many times have we seen people commenting about mothers standing outside food banks with their iPhones and an Apple Watch on? And you think, well, the issue here is where parents prioritize their spending and they're not being responsible with their spending, largely because it's not their money that they're spending anyway. They know that there's always going to be a safety net to pick them up. Now, that's the right-hand side of the argument, but I think the left-hand side of the argument would say it doesn't matter whose fault it is, that child should be given food.
Yes.
Where the mother has dripping in Gucci, if the child needs food, the child needs food. And it's the responsibility of a civilized society to put that safety net in place.
Yes, but well, and again, actually, that is a plausible case. That is a plausible case. But when I saw this exchange between the Conservative MP and Marcus Rashford, that's what Rebecca stimulated me to put my now globally infamous tweet out, which was basically saying that, quote, "There's a disproportionate problem within the UK Afro-Caribbean community of black men abandoning their pregnant girlfriends. In order to understand this, your comment below, can you confirm whether you've ever met your father?" Now, that's a harsh, I know that's tough. I get that. It's 100% tough. And people say, that's racist. But it's not.
Do you have any apology to make to Marcus Rashford for that tweet, which was personal, wasn't it?
I'm afraid if you can't stand tweets like that, you shouldn't be on Twitter. That would be my best advice to Marcus and his PR team. And the thing is that everything I try to do, and of course I'm not perfect, Rebecca, and we all make mistakes. I make mistakes, but I don't necessarily think this was one of them. I've made much worse mistakes. I try to make it fact-based. So there was evidence behind this. And I've just brought up, if people can see this okay, folks, I don't know if you can see, but basically this is taken from Office of National Statistics 2007. Now, I've got other data, but this was 2007. And basically you can see from government stats, the percentage of lone parent households amongst Black ethnic groups is pretty high. And the highest group is Black Caribbean families at 48%. As 36% of Black African households. And going on, by the way, single parent families are also amongst 10% amongst Indians, Bangladeshis 12, Pakistanis 13, Chinese 5, and whites 22%. So get this, I'm referencing a range of ethnicities. So where's the racism? Because
okay, so no ecology has just raised a point on the stream, and what he said, well, you clearly don't understand what racism is, and I think what that is reflecting is the fact that you've pointed the finger at Marcus Rashford, who I think actually is mixed race. I'm not sure that he's fully Black, but he is mixed race, and that you've typified a feature backed up by the research in the comment, basically, have you ever seen your dad? Because you typify somebody from an ethnic group and you are Black, therefore that's racist. And I think that's where the jump in logic would come from. So what do you say about that? Because he is Black, and it is more prevalent in Blacks that there are children in single parent families. Is that in any way racist?
No, it's not. I mean, I'm sorry. I know Twitter hates this, but facts aren't racist. I understand that annoys some people, but they're not. And I would actually then sort of like to bring, my next witness I would like to bring is Marcus Rashford, because I think we should listen to Marcus Rashford. Now, I can't bring this one up on screen, but I do have it. I've got it here. It is an article from the 1st of September, so it's pretty recent, from The Sun. And it's a very poignant article, actually, Rebecca, where he talks about the fact he was haunted by the sound of his mum crying at night to sleep as she struggled to provide for her family. And the details are here. I can put a link in on my Twitter timeline. But he says, I remember the sound of my mum crying herself to sleep this day, having worked a 14-hour shift, unsure how she was going to make ends meet. That was my reality. Well, you see, Rebecca, here's the problem. I totally sympathize with that. And again, I don't want it to be too personal. But what he's saying is that his mum worked to bring him and his 4 siblings up because his dad wasn't there. His own words. It's not David Vance. That's Marcus Rashford. So if people have an issue with this, please take it up with Marcus Rashford, not me. I very much regret the circumstances that young man and his family were brought up in. I totally do. But, you know, the abuse has been thrown at me. And all I'm sort of saying is, well, Marcus, you've tweeted you've never met anyone who didn't. Like, to go back to the original tweet that he made, you've never met anyone who didn't want to look after their children. Well, I'm sorry. You know, your own words rather contradict you on that. So I felt that I was trying to use facts. And as always, Rebecca, on Twitter, you know, people don't really look at facts. They just emote.
Well, perception is reality in the modern world, isn't it? I just want to talk about that piece of research, actually, from the Office for National Statistics that looked at the percentages. The one I've read actually is 2019, and that was looking at 2018 figures. And in that, 28% of single-parent families are Black. 19% of single-parent families are mixed race, and 10% of Indigenous white families are single-parent families, and very, very low, 3.8% of Asian, Indian subcontinent families are single parent families. So the problem, it does exist, and the facts are there. That is all done by a government body. It's not you or I making up numbers. But I wonder how, in the current climate, it is possible to, sort of address those issues. Now my particular take on this, and for those that don't know, I've been a barrister for a long time, did a lot of matrimonial work, did a lot of care work. So I have seen a lot of deprived children at the very, very bottom of the sort of the ability scale, with very, very poor parents, as in very neglectful parents. And it didn't matter what support they were given. The biggest predictor of whether you were going to be a good parent or not was whether you'd had a decent parent or not, and then the level to which you'd been exposed to sexual abuse or crime through your parents, by and large. So with a high degree of professional relevance, I do make this statement that broken families destroy children's lives, and it does destroy children's perception of lives as well. So maybe this is why you end up with the multi-billionaire Lewis Hamilton feeling that he needs to take the knee. He's half white, half black, but he identified himself with the BLM, but he's actually a victim of parental split up. Admittedly, there was a rapprochement between his parents, but his white mother brought him up, and he was essentially estranged from his father for a very long time. And he identified with his mother really for most of his life. And it was, his mother that helped him get all the funding and, that encouraged him in sport. And that came, I think, was a little bit too much for people to swallow, to see the likes of Lewis Hamilton almost turning his back on his mother and claiming to be black when it suited him. But the thing that interests me in the statistics is this is not a BAME problem.
That's right.
It is almost exclusively a problem in black societies. And I like to look at it. Is this a problem that the women in black societies are not sufficiently vocal or empowered to overcome the problems of their men? And what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, that's an excellent analysis. And the stats completely back what you've just said up, Rebecca, be they 2007, be they 2011, be they 2019. The stats do highlight a particular problem, within one specific, particularly acute within one area, which is the area, ironically, that Marcus Rashford seems unwilling, and certainly his supporters seem unwilling to recognize there's even a problem. You see, I believe you can't solve a problem, it doesn't matter what area it's in, unless you accept that there is a problem. And in this one, I think we come to, and this is where the politics comes into this, we come to like a fundamental sort of issue here, and that is, it's the thing that the Conservative MP mentioned. It's the government will help out to feed, but basically responsibility has to lie with the mother and father. And a lot of these black women are being abandoned. That's what I said in my tweet. I don't believe there's any, that's not racist, although it seems to have triggered people. That's so unfortunate for those ladies and for those kids, as you say, Rebecca, who go through possibly like Marcus did when he was young anyway, till he got till the age of 11, and he left home to go to the Manchester United Academy or whatever it is. It makes life very miserable. But where I've got a real objection is, now I'm going to come to this one, Marcus's solution is for the government to step in to be the parent financially. But I feel that what that does, Rebecca, is that rewards the bad behavior from the absent parent, in this case, mostly fathers. So if you reward bad behavior, what do you get? You get more of it. So I want to solve it.
That takes me back to my point
Right.
that if you punish bad behavior, it's the child who suffers.
Yes, but the child's suffering anyway. You know, if you say, well, yes, okay, the father's legged it. He's not taking any financial responsibility for, in this case, his own 5 kids. Right? He's not taking any responsibility for them. Well, I thought there was laws that actually meant that they did have to take some sort of responsibility. So maybe if there's not, then there should be. There's the suggestion. Let's toughen up the legal code so that, you know, as I say, if 2 people bring a child into this world, am I being racist by simply saying I think they, not the taxpayers, have to take prime responsibility? If that completely fails, then yes, Rebecca, we're a civilized, humane society, and we won't see children starve. But this is a problem, and it's in the community from which Marcus Rashford hails from. So why can't we constructively engage in it without me being described as, you know, a mixture of Hitler and Stalin?
Do you think it might be the case, or do you think it would be fair to say that we are all products of our upbringing and products of our surroundings? And so, do you think it might be fair to say that it's you know, you're from Northern Ireland, there are deep religious roots, deep moral roots still embedded within Northern Ireland, and that the moral compass and the moral context of David Vance is very different to the moral compass and outlook of somebody who, say, lives in Brixton in a different, maybe a completely different cultural context, and that maybe the one shouldn't really be judging the other on both sides.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even a question of judgment, making judgments, because it's Marcus Rashford who wants the taxpayer to fund what he wants. I'm not looking the taxpayer to fund anything. But I have to say, Rebecca, I do want to bring to the table a couple of character witnesses, because I think this is very important, and I hope everyone watching pays very close attention to the next couple of minutes, because I've got a few people that I think kind of share my view. So let me bring up the first one, Rebecca. I want to share this with you. Yes, it's Barack Obama, Chapter 7, The Audacity of Hope. This is Barack talking, this well-known white racist. Then there's a collapse of the 2-person black household, a phenomenon that reflects a casualness towards sex and child rearing amongst black men, for which there is no excuse. Now, it's not.
Well, I have to say at this point, one of your detractors, Gary Lineker, has a certain casualness towards sexual fidelity as well, hasn't he? So, I mean, he's hardly one to adopt a moral high ground, given his background. And I hope to God Marcus Rashford hasn't been a naughty boy either. Otherwise, he's going to come in for a bit of a drubbing on that one. So, you know, discussion of morality, you do have to come to that argument with entirely clean hands, don't you?
Well, you do. And actually, Rebecca, that's a nice lead in, because I wanted to also bring up one of my main critics of last night, the Labour MP, David Lammy. Now, Lammy was on Twitter, obviously calling for my removal, for my head to be taken, figuratively, from my body. Here's what David Lammy had to say, which I think people might want to say. David Lammy says absent fathers are a key cause of knife crime. Back in 2012, and he was talking about particularly in an inner city context. So he seemed to recognize, Rebecca, that having fathers around was kind of a good idea, especially in the early years of a child. And, you know, it wasn't just David Lammy. No, because guess what? The infamous war criminal, Tony Blair, was on record 2005 suggesting that single mothers are really causing problems in Britain's inner cities. Britain's inner cities are, of course, the central nexus of ethnicities. So I've got Barack Obama, David Lammy.
Can I just push you on one point there?
Yeah, of course.
A couple of points on the evidence that the majority of single mothers are actually in the 39 to 45 year age group. They are not the teen mothers. Teen mothers tend to either live with their own mother or do tend to live with their partners. So the demonizing of single mothers, it's actually an unfair characterization that single mothers per se are a drain on society. And another point I'd pull you up on is if you take your argument out of London and say put your argument into Bradford, Leeds, Oldham, Rochdale, Halifax, most of Sheffield, a lot of Manchester, you've got predominantly Muslim inner cities there, and they do not have the problem of unsupported parenting. Actually, you have multiple generations caring for the children extremely well. And their emphasis, and I am racially stereotyping here, Muslims and Hindus tend to be extremely devoted to educating their children and tend to be extremely grateful for the British education system. And because there's multi-generational living, then education is prioritized, and child welfare in Muslim and Hindu communities and Chinese communities is extremely high, and there isn't the single parenting. But when you go to places like Birmingham and London that do have, and Bristol, that have the higher Afro-Caribbean populations in them, then you see that problem of single parenting creating the legacies of crime, care. A lot of care proceedings go on in those cities in those ethnic groups. And so, I know David Lammy in his report, which actually was a good report, and I'm sorry to say that David Lammy has let himself down after that report, because it was an honest report, and he was actually looking at rates of imprisonment, criminalization of Black people, and he came to the conclusion that there would be 9,000 or 10,000 fewer serving prisoners in British prisons if the Blacks were representative in prisons as they are represented in society. So they're overrepresented in prisons. And Muslims are ever so slightly, but Hindus have virtually no presence in British prisons. So in terms of the immigrants in British prisons, actually last year's numbers, we have a lot of Albanians and Romanians now, but the predominant group by disproportion is Black and then Muslim. So is it the case that you can say what you want about the numbers, but there still is a fundamental structural problem here that we haven't been able, the Equality Act hasn't addressed it, all sort of anti-discrimination legislation, it fundamentally has left Black people behind. There is a problem, isn't there?
Oh, there is a problem. And actually, Rebecca, you're very right to sort of say that it's almost a geographically located problem in terms of, as you say, London in particular, Birmingham as well, I think, and perhaps Bristol and one or two other places. So it is quite specific. But this is for me the tragedy of the whole thing, and this is why it's been so irksome this past 24 hours to see the knee-jerk reaction. Like you, like most people watching this, sensible people watching this, we want to see this problem fixed, addressed. We don't want to see young Black kids being brought up in poverty and not having a father about the place, which is unfortunately what we do have. So that's why I was piqued by the fact that Marcus Rashford himself plainly stated he'd never met anyone that had behaved like this. It's perfectly obvious, Rebecca, just in the law of statistics, that, roughly, if it's 48%, 38%, you can pick your number, but a significant number of Black men, fathers, could do better by the women that they have children with, and particularly looking after those kids. So, again, this is why I feel I'm justified in my argument. And it's not racism to want better for Black people, folks. It's really not racism to do that. And as I say, the statistics are one thing, but what we're talking about now, Rebecca, is kind of moving it on a wee bit, because it's important, because how do you legislate, for example, to make sure that fathers in these particular households be responsible? Because honestly, too many of them aren't.
Yeah, well, there is. I mean, the Child Support Agency is one, but it's not just money, is it? Poor people don't make bad parents. It's bad people make poor parents. And so it's not only a financial argument, because our welfare state actually is sufficient if parents prioritize their spending.
Yeah.
Our welfare state is sufficient to provide the basics of food and lodging for a single parent family. But boys need role models. And
Yes,
I'm really going to target boys now, because boys are the problem. Boys are committing knife crimes. You don't see girls committing knife crimes. You do hear some loudmouth, gobby behavior from the girls, but by and large, it's the boys who commit the knife crime. It's the boys who do the county lines drug dealing. It's the boys who end up in custody. It's the boys who end up making girls pregnant and then sodding off to make somebody else pregnant. Quite often these families have multiple half siblings, literally weeks or months apart in age, many children to a significant number of men. And yeah, they basically shag and roll on and don't really care. So, as I say, you do have to remember there's a child in this, and the child is always the victim of poor choices by the parents. So we've seen a reduction in the rate of abortion. We've seen a massive reduction in the numbers of babies who are handed over for adoption at birth. In the 1960s and 70s, a girl who felt she couldn't bring a child up would hand it over for adoption. That almost never happens now, almost never. So we have a reduction in the number of abortions. We have a reduction in the number of adoptions, because the welfare state actually enables mothers to keep their babies. And then it enables them actually to have more babies. And women are, because they're empowered by the money, they don't need a man spending the money as well. But the issue for the boys is absence of positive role models. So isn't it fair to say that somebody like Marcus Rashford is in fact an excellent role model for these boys?
Yes, in some ways it is. He's carved out a very successful career for himself as a footballer, and lots of people I know are football fans. So yeah, absolutely. That's a good model. He demonstrated a desire to get himself out of the problems he experienced as a young boy. So that's a good thing. So I salute Marcus Rashford in that regard. Of course, he's a very young man as well. And, one of the things, Rebecca, and we've touched on this before on our streams together, he's a 22-year-old young man. I don't think he's married. I don't think so. Not sure he's in a relationship. His life experience, let's put it like this. He's at the younger end of life experience. I'm at the other end of life experience, right? With experience in life, views change and alter and whatnot. And so in many regards, if you want to look for role models, look for people who perhaps have lived life a little bit more than multimillionaire 22-year-old footballers, not taking away from him in particular, because if I was 22 again, Rebecca, and I could be on his 220 grand a week, I'd be very happy to take that, But you're right. Look, there is, and you're right to delineate this one. I guess I focused in my own mind. I'm focused very much on the financial element, because that's what Marcus Rashford. He's looking the state to subsidise billions, and as a kind of a conservative of the small c, I think that's the wrong approach, because it rewards fecklessness. But there is the equally valid point, which is, where's the role model? And, if young men in particular grow up in these inner cities like London, and we see this, Rebecca, in the crime stats, without role model, it doesn't lead to good outcomes. So again, actually, it's the same be it for your logic or for my logic. The best outcome is a father being there. That's the best.
But you can't force a father to be there, and you can't force the mother to either adopt or terminate the pregnancy. The fact is, the child is born. Now, I mean, I'm sorry to keep doing this, but I did an awful lot of youth crime as well in my practice. And one thing that struck me time and time and time again, and this is not a racial thing, with every single boy that I saw in the youth courts, they had nothing to do. And we had Tory and Labour policies of property development. The obsession with building properties in this country was beyond control from about the mid-1990s, after the 1990 property recession, from the mid-90s, so John Major's government, all the way through to basically 2015, I'd say. School playing fields were shut and sold off. Public spaces were sold off. Planning system was liberalized so that they could just trash inner city green spaces. And suddenly the kids who need it most suddenly don't have sport. And at the same time, any residual sport there was in school, they weren't allowed to compete. And quite often, or they weren't allowed to succeed. They weren't allowed to win. You had to win on behalf of a team. So this whole concept that I grew up with, where you did the 100-meter dash and you won it and you got the prize. When my children were in state school in Southampton, it was shock horror when I suggested my daughter got a prize for winning the 100 meters. No, she got a prize for the team. And I was shocked beyond belief at how poor the sport ethic is in our country, how poor drama and art teaching is. There is no quality to extracurricular activities. Teachers are fat, they're lazy, they are driven by results, they're driven by league tables, and this notion of having a lot of physical exercise at school is a distant memory. So what hope have these kids got that those boys can't run off their testosterone at 12? Is it any wonder they join gangs? Because gangs are just an avatar for a team, aren't they? It's a football team, a gang, or a rugby team. That's what boys do.
I think it sort of is. I also think, unfortunately, it can be seen as surrogate fathers as well. The younger kids admire the older kids in the gangs. So it's an avatar for teams, but it's also a potential surrogate for fathers. But again, interesting point, because that removal of those facilities is probably most acute in our big cities. London, most particularly of all. So I think that's a valid point. But then again, we get lots of talk, Rebecca, about, oh well, if we had more youth clubs and snooker halls, that would sort it out. I mean, I'm not sure that actually does sort it out. I think it's a complex issue, and the thing about complex issues like this, Twitter's a 260 character medium. Please, how on earth can that's why this is good, and I don't care who watches this and who doesn't. At least we're delving in a depth that you don't get. So yes, there are all these issues that all of them feeding in to the situation we see with these disaffected young kids who don't really have anywhere to go. They've got all that youthful, and again, good point. Testosterone. It's a young male thing. It's not really, I don't think, a young female thing. They've nowhere to go. So role models like Marcus Rashford are good in that sense. But by the same token, role models have to be held responsible for the things that they say. So we've just spent this last 45 minutes trying to examine the reasons and the causes behind this. Now, Marcus Rashford tweeted out on the 7th of September, whenever it was, that he didn't find this kind of conversation helpful because when the Conservative MP said families should have mostly responsibility, Marcus didn't like that. So, again, honesty, all I ever seek to have is honest, open conversations. And that's what I tried to have. I absolutely failed at it, by the way, yesterday. But that was the motive behind it. So I hope the sensible people on this stream will understand the motive. Just like Rebecca's questions, I'm kind of driven by the same motive, expressed in different ways. Yeah, but we're all different. But ultimately, it's about, let's talk about what are the causes and how do we deal with them. And I don't think
we need. But I mean, I do feel that it's very easy to point a finger and say but or what about. It's actually much harder to find a solution because actually the problems are so nuanced and complex. I mean, it is worth remembering that the society or the ethnic group that suffers the most in Britain is probably the most embedded in British culture, because the Afro-Caribbeans as a group have been British for a hell of a lot longer than the Indians and then the Pakistanis and then subsequently the predominantly Eastern Europeans. So these diasporas of people, the ones that have been here the very longest, have actually done the worst. They've had the worst outcomes. And I've often wondered, was Lee Kuan Yew right? When he ran Singapore, he was the president of Singapore. He was a complete and utter dictator, but he was a benign dictator. But he had a view that you couldn't allow ghettos to form. Ghettos meaning, not in the derogatory sense of the word, but you couldn't let groups of people congregate or live or coexist in a cohesive society if they were disproportionate to the background level in society. So in Singapore, in council housing, in public funded schools, public funded hospitals, absolutely every area of public life in Singapore, you never ever lose the dynamic of 65% Chinese, 30% Malay, and then the rest is made up of expats, and of which Tamils are the largest group. Now, he did that to prevent the rise in fundamentalism of Islam coming in from Malaysia. But the thing is, it does prevent ghettos forming. It puts the Chinese as the master race of Singapore, but they say, well, it's our country. So would it be better if we said the people like Hampshire, you know what, the council housing, you should make it available so that not every black person goes to Brixton. They only ever went to Brixton, by the way, because when they came off the Windrush boat, Brixton was the closest police station to where they lived, and they had to go in and register themselves. And it's pure coincidence of history that they all go to Brixton. And so if you don't have the echo chamber, the ghetto attitude, why does everybody live in London? It's such a hellhole. Why would you live there? I mean, just come and live in Hampshire or Northern Ireland. Such nice places to live with a better quality of life. But
well,
they
yeah,
need
I've often wondered that. Yeah, but here's the thing. You mentioned the Windrush generation, and it's a really interesting point, Rebecca. Some of those who have been here the longest have got the worst outcomes, as you say. But one of the things that intrigues me is that those people who came across the Windrush generation, let's call them, those people were coming from societies where the family unit was very strong. A lot of them came from evangelical Protestant backgrounds. That's just, and in fact, there's still a significant element there amongst those communities. The difference is that back in the 60s and the 70s, those family units, they were married units. That was very much like where they came from. One of the sad things we've seen is that community, the one we've talked quite a bit tonight, marriage has kind of fallen away in the generation from the 80s, 90s, and noughties. And I wonder, I don't know why that is. Again, Rebecca, probably too complex to go into here, but I just observed the fact that these people were very family focused, really were. That's why they were good people to bring here, by the way. But that aspect of their culture, where they came from, they seem to be ruined by being here, actually, which is kind of sad.
Because they've come from a Judeo-Christian background to a Judeo-Christian country.
Yeah.
And we've allowed Islam, we've allowed Hinduism, we've allowed Buddhism. We've had a massive resurgence of Roman Catholicism come into the country.
Yeah.
So, but somehow it's dropped by the wayside for that single group in society. And this is why I push back at being called a racist, is because if we were racist, then Hindus wouldn't be as successful as they are. Chinese wouldn't be as successful as they are. We are not a racist country, but we are failing Black people. There is something that we are not addressing, and we maybe do need to go back and re-examine how we could do better. And I know a lot of people will not like me saying that, but maybe we do need to do better, because it's not working, and it's not working for all of us when one group is so dysfunctional, the crime rates are so high, the legacy of crime within the families is high, the level of care proceedings is high, the standard of parenting is high, is very poor, and the standard of education is very poor. How do we do that?
Well, you see, I think the simple truth is we can always do better. Every society can do better. And most definitely on this issue, this country can do better, and our politicians can do better. But that's not helped when we have people like David Lammy, for example, essentially using the issue for petty political advantage. That doesn't help anybody whatsoever. When we see the likes of Don Butler and some of these other Labour MPs, they're never going to engage in this one, Rebecca. They want to use grievance, and they want to essentially to hustle more money out of the taxpayer, none of which will go an iota towards dealing with any of the points that we've discussed on this show tonight. It just won't.
I've just seen Nocology come up again, obviously a contributor here on the stream, and he or she has said, we will tell you what to do better and you will tell us we are wrong. Well, Nocology, I'm really sorry to tell you that if we are to listen to BLM, all you've told us to do is to defund the police. And I'm afraid you can see by the pictures of Portland, Oregon, why we will never defund the police, and why even your dog whistlers in the Labour Party, even they are not suggesting you defund the police. I'm not saying we shouldn't spend money on the problem. I'm not saying we shouldn't look at structural reform in order to improve things. But ultimately, what is your solution, and how are you going to keep your families together and stop legacy crime in the families? I mean, I over to you, Nocology, because you seem to think that there are no solutions, or that we'll criticize yours. But the only one I've ever seen is defund the police. And I don't think that is structural reform that's ever going to have any traction to it.
No, yeah. I mean, the thing is that coming up with effective solutions is difficult, Rebecca, and it takes people of goodwill to do it as well. If you're setting out with a preconceived notion of this, then you're not going to achieve anything. It's about people. I'm prepared to accept other people's points of view on this. And I guess what's been a little sad is that to see so many of the great British woke Twitterati after my guts, just because I wanted to raise this issue. And I have to say, Rebecca, again, don't care what anyone else says, we've done more to address this issue, the nuances of the issue, the nuances of it, than any tweet I've seen, which is basically saying to Twitter, remove Vance's blue tick and boot him off the platform. Well, hey, you can do that. But the problem's going to be there, and the problem will get worse, and it'll never get better. So would it not be better to engage in sensible conversation? What's wrong with that? What does Gary Lineker, there's been so many of them seeking my demise. I mean, what's their solutions? What's their contribution apart from censorship? And
well, I mean, now I'm going to put my Free Speech Union hat on. Cancel culture is not the answer. And equally, we shouldn't cancel Black Lives Matter. We shouldn't cancel people we don't agree with. And whatever you say, David, it can be as reprehensible as you like. It's still free speech. But free speech isn't the answer. It's about engaging in debate. Because, say you get cancelled off Twitter. Then what? Am I going to get cancelled next? I mean, Katie Hopkins has been cancelled.
Yep.
I disagree with it, but I felt her views were too far, and she said things that were too far at times. Yep. I think Tommy Robinson, although some things he said were absolutely spot on, but just a little bit too early for their time, I find his rhetoric quite insightful, and I can see why there are concerns and why I can see some of the arguments why he has been removed. But to simply remove you, for the Centre for Countering Digital Hate, they're out to get you as well.
Oh, yeah.
The Oxbridge Mafia, as I call them, they want to cleanse the thinking, and by having an argument with a person of color, a black person, if that makes you a racist, then there is no future for discussion.
Well, that's exactly where I kind of think we kind of are being moved to. So if different ethnicities cannot discuss things and disagree amicably, then I'm afraid this world is going into a very, very dark place, and Twitter just happens to be a particular acute example of it. But you're right. I mean, I'm well aware of the fact that the hate mob would like to erase me. They've tried it before, and maybe they'll succeed this time. I don't know. I don't care, because it's not going to stop me saying what I say. I try to engage as nicely as possible. As I said at the beginning of this, Rebecca, I make mistakes. Every tweet, could you have worded it differently? Yeah, you probably could. Could you have done it better? Yeah, definitely. Everything, because again, I believe in always improving your life. But something, there's a genuine desire to engage on an issue that goes beyond just shut up because you hold a different point of view. I mean, I don't ask the BLM Mafia who called for my removal as well, by the way, BLM UK. Thanks, guys. I don't call for you to be removed. I mean, I'm happy for cultural Marxists like yourself to show yourself up in your true colors. But I don't know how we solve these things, Rebecca, but the best place to start is honest debate. And I think that's what we've done our best to try and have. And I've read some of the comments in the stream here. So it's a lot more civilized than last night. What I'm glad to see, interesting to see actually, that the people who are most vociferously hating me, of which there are quite a few, don't seem to have been able to last the journey. It's almost like when a little bit of light is shone on them, they scuttle away off into the darkness. Off you go, because you can't back up what you're saying, and you know that. You just want to shout and howl, and I'm afraid I'm at an age where I'm not interested in that kind of shouting and howling.
the other point is that, the likes of Gary Lineker sitting in their ivory towers, David Lammy also sits in an ivory tower, Ash Sarkar, shouting Solar, as I call her, they all do sit in ivory towers, and actually they don't engage on Twitter. They just drop what I define as depth charges. And the difference with you, with your big following, is actually you do engage quite a lot, and we do try and engage with the stream. It's quite difficult sometimes with the things flicking by quickly, but you are unique in that you do engage, and I hope that this is going to happen again, and I think it's going to get worse, that we do just be kind to people, and instead of attacking, just ask the question, like, why do you say that? But I'm afraid the people in the ivory towers are never going to answer those questions. So that's why Twitter becomes such a polarized binary debate, that you're either on one side or the other, and it's a hate fest across the camp. So maybe Twitter's the problem.
Oh, I think that is fundamentally the issue. Twitter is a massive problem. It didn't used to be. I've been around on Twitter a long time, Rebecca, and it didn't used to be as vile as it is. When facts and reason are put aside, and what I find myself then defenseless, because if people won't accept facts when I present the facts, it's very difficult. Where do you go? There's no point. I mean, I try to engage with people, and I know from others that that other people have tried to engage as well. But I'm afraid the elite mobs, the leaders of these elite mobs, they just want people erased. That's what they want. Gary Lineker wants me gone. Lammy wants me gone. Owen Jones wants me gone. I mean, but there's a kind of pattern in this one that I've seen, and it's as I stand over what I say. As I say, I also believe I can do better. I totally believe that, because that's a good life lesson. Young people out there, and I can see one or two trolls here on the stream. And actually, folks, you don't know it, but you're making our point for us, because all you do is insult. That demonstrates a lamentable lack of reason and ability to discern. I wish you well. I hope you grow up and mature and understand different people's points of view. But I think, Rebecca, that's our point of view up. That's the hour done. So I will leave the great masses to judge me in whichever way you want. But to use an expression I've used before, my aim is true.
Like Spandau Ballet.
More like Elvis Costello, but yeah, I'll get
Okay, was it Elvis Costello?
Yeah. So hey, listen. On that musical note, less to be said. Rebecca and I can't bring music into this. Listen, thanks everybody for being here, and thanks for. I've received messages from lots of people in the past 24 hours. Thank you both for coming back to listen to us both tonight. A big thanks to Rebecca, whose suggestion this was. I think it's good to have had this exploration of ideas, and I hope everyone enjoyed it. And if I'm going to be around for the rest for the foreseeable future, hopefully you will continue to follow me. Obviously, follow Rebecca as well. And I'll be back soon when I've had a big lie down and a rest. Okay, everybody, that's bye from me.
Bye from me. Bye, everybody.